Joey Clark.
Welcome into News and Views in the afternoon. I'm your host, Joey Clark. We've got the press conference for the Riverfront Brawl coming up at 1 p.m., but now, as is tradition, kicking off Tuesdays here on News and Views, we have the one, the only Judge Andrew Napolitano joining us. Judge, how are you this afternoon?
I'm great, Joey. How are you, my dear friend?
I'm doing quite well, and, I thought Montgomery was not going to be the center of attention, at least after Friday night, because Trump was here in Montgomery. And right after that indictment, I thought at least, okay, the ISR on, that is the corporate press, it'll move on to something else. And then this Riverfront Brawl happens here in our dear city, Montgomery, Alabama. In your time on the bench, in your time, studying the law, are there any particular cases that come to mind? And how do you even begin to adjudicate something like this with this many people involved?
Well, it's really the task of the government, which is the police and their investigators. Today, using cell phone data, when I was on the bench, there weren't cell phones, but using cell phone data, which is extraordinarily helpful in telling whether people are taking selfies or making videos, or the data is just showing where people moved and how they moved about. So the government has the task of determining who are the defendants and against whom can they prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt and presenting that to the court. Now, this is done in a series of steps. Sometimes you find 2 or 3 people that were involved and you cut a deal with them. Tell us who else you know was involved and we'll go easy on you. Instead of 5 years in jail, you're going to get 6 months, or instead of 2 years in jail, you'll get just probation. So the government has a variety of techniques available to it, which the courts have upheld, pardon me, Joey, which will allow it to gather evidence. But these cases are very difficult to try. Do you try them all at once if there's 10 defendants, or you try them separately? The government wants to try them separately because if you try them all at once, everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else and the jury's confused and throws up their hands. If you try them separately and you have enough evidence to convict, and you do this over and over again, you can get a series of convictions. And then after a few convictions, you try your best cases first, you'll then start to get guilty pleas as the others realize, I better cut a deal because look at what just happened to my buddy.
Well, and again, folks, the mayor of Montgomery, Stephen Reed, and Chief Daryl Albert of the Montgomery Police Department would be doing a press conference here at 1 p.m. Central Time. We'll be bringing that live.
I'm speaking to you generically. I don't know exactly what happened. I heard there was some sort of a riot there, and then my producer told me that you wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, well, it looks like these were guys, it was a pontoon boat blocking a riverboat that had something like 200 people on it, about, weighs 500,000 pounds, and they have a designated space down on Montgomery's riverfront for the Harriet II, as it's called. The captain called the show yesterday, and he said they're guys in a pontoon boat, and he actually has known them in past seasons. Are kind of boisterous, drunk idiots, and they crossed a line, attacking his first mate, and so seeing 6 white fellas attacking his black first mate, everybody in the area reacted to that, especially his shipmates. Some jumped in the water to swim to help, and that's the mayhem you see on all the internet videos now.
Oh, I'm sorry this happened. Was anybody seriously injured?
Thank God, no, not that I've heard of. There were moments where a guy actually took a big plastic folding chair and was just it looked like a WWE wrestling match. I was just talking to some colleagues, and the internet always wins. And I think my colleague just said, us in the black community, we have a lot of stuff we try to get through that worries us, but we try to get through it with a little bit of humor, and hope is the best way. And I think hopefully that'll be the message coming out of this. But it's just a weird thing. How difficult does it become when you're doing a case like this, or it's something, say, like a former president like Donald Trump? If you're the judge in a case that has massive media coverage, how do you even go about dealing with that?
Ignorant of the media. In state court, you really don't get to decide for yourself if you want cameras in the courtroom. It would depend on the policy of the state, and if the newspapers or the television well, it wouldn't be newspapers, if the television companies make an application, you know, if you deny it, you're going to be overruled. In federal court, there are no cameras, period. It doesn't even pay to make the application. When the cameras are there, we're in state court now, they're so small and they're so silent, you forget that they are there. You're not going to see the sort of preening for re-election that Judge Lance Ito was accused of during the OJ trial. In these federal trials of the president, he has one criminal trial so far in state court in New York. Cameras are allowed. He has 2 federal criminal trials, Mar-a-Lago and January 6th. Cameras are not allowed. So the judge will just be oblivious. You know, judges are human beings. They read newspapers, they watch television, they go on the internet. But the judge should be oblivious to any public pressure. It's one of the reasons in the federal system and in New Jersey, not in every state, it's only 3 states that do this besides the federal system, you get lifetime tenure. So you don't care what the public thinks in terms of keeping your job. You don't run for re-election. You don't need to be reappointed. You don't have to please the political powers that be, or even the pollsters. You just do the right thing, which is really what everybody wants when it comes to justice. You want a judge on the bench who's worried about re-election. You want a judge on the bench who's going to do the right thing for the Constitution, for the defendant, and for the government.
Wow. And it's, this is the direction I'm going to go. And again, folks are talking to Judge Andrew Napolitano. You can always go to judgenap.com and check out his latest op-eds and video clips, or just search for Judging Freedom on YouTube and wherever podcasts are available. It's a fantastic show, folks. It makes me happy to see it growing over this last year or two. But like I said at the beginning of our discussion here, Judge, Donald John Trump was in Montgomery Friday night. A normal Alabama GOP dinner has 300, 400 people, maybe 500. There was 2,700 people, probably plus a little overflow. It was a massive crowd. Coach Tuberville, Senator Tuberville, introduced Trump, and he's fighting the good fight, is undeterred. But I have sat here on these radio airwaves over the stream and talked to you, and you are saying, as Judge Andrew Napolitano, Donald Trump, do not mock the prosecutors. Do not mock the process. And then Trump comes to Montgomery and goes, we just need one more indictment, and the election's over, folks. We got this thing in the bag. What do you make of his behavior and how he is just outright taunting these indictments?
Not a bad imitation, Joey. That's the first comment that I have to make. In fact, it's an excellent one. My friend and colleague Brett Baer does the best. He claims he'll never do it on air. The best Donald Trump imitation I've heard, but yours is quite good. It rivals his. Look, there's an old phrase, and I think this might be an Alabama phrase. You'll understand it. You don't taunt the alligator until after you cross the stream. I mean, it is just insane to taunt people who have the power to bring about your ruination. Now, the people he's taunting are highly professional and not likely to be moved by that. But in areas where they have total discretion to make judgments, they're human beings. So why give them ammunition? I mean, if he gets what he wants, which is to return to the White House, he will be the chief law enforcement officer in the federal government. And he's mocking the system. Look, the system is not always perfect. You've heard me rip into the FBI. My column this week is about the FBI spying on itself. How's that?
Wow.
It's the latest FBI revelation. I won't even tell you how this happened. You'll see it in the column. You'll have the column shortly. But there's a lot to be desired in federal law enforcement. But it is clearly far better to resist the government's push against him by normal legal means than by these political means, because his lawyers won't be able to deal with it. One of the reasons a lot of lawyers have left him is because he makes his cases worse. He doesn't take their advice, and they have to deal with this in a public courtroom. I mean, who's he going to attack next? The judge?
Right.
He's already said he can't get a fair trial. That is an extreme allegation to make against a life tenure judge without any basis whatsoever. He doesn't need that. Maybe thinks by taunting these people, they'll bend over backwards to show that they are impervious to his taunts, and he'll get some favors from them. Forget about it. The feds are not going to give you a favor, and a life tenured judge is not going to give you a favor. The feds are going to do everything they can lawfully and morally to win, and a life tenured judge is going to do what, in her opinion, the Constitution and the laws require. No more and no less.
Well, and you just mentioned that President Trump has had a lot of difficulty keeping good help or finding good help after he treats some lawyers, though. Am I wrong to be impressed with John Laro, or however you say his name? He seems like a very capable guy, at least in the media appearances I've watched.
He admitted every allegation against Trump and says he has legal defenses to them. That is a catastrophic thing to do. The government's going to play those tapes to the jury. You see that man sitting there at the defense table next to Donald Trump, his lawyer for the past 6 months? Watch this. Trump did this, Trump did that. He didn't think it was wrong. It was aspirational. It wasn't legal. He's a charming guy. He's very good looking. He's soft spoken. He's unflusterable. In that respect, he has many natural talents and assets. But I thought, and I listened to most of them on Sunday, that round robin that he did with just about every major network really made the prosecutors salivate.
See, and this is why I ask you. I have no legal training whatsoever, folks. So this is why I asked the judge.
You know, Joey, people like you, intelligent, influencer, mover of the dial, millions look up to you because of your work on the media. It's aimed at them. I don't think this was aimed at the judge or aimed at people like me or aimed at the Circuit Court of Appeals. It's aimed at potential jurors and movers and shakers and influencers. And in that field, he did quite well. But people like I am, lawyer, former judge, television analyst, legal scholar, whatever you want to call me, see these things a little differently. I tried to see it through the eyes of the prosecutor once I heard him first admit Trump's behavior. Remember, all these First Amendment defenses that he elevated, they are profound, sound, lawful, moral, ethical, constitutional defenses. But they're for the judge. They're not for the jury. He doesn't get to argue freedom of speech before the jury. He only gets to argue it before the judge months before the trial. And after he loses those arguments, and he will, what does he have left? Nothing.
So a jury doesn't get to hear a theory like that. They just have to stick to like matters of fact?
Correct. The judge will say there's no First Amendment defense here. Proceed with the trial. Okay, what is your defense then? If there's no First Amendment defense, why tip your hand to the feds? The feds have to tip their hand to defense counsel. Defense counsel never has to tip his hands to the feds. Mr. Lauro, as articulate and attractive as he is, showed his cards to the feds.
Well, and we'll see what happened. I maintain that Trump's taunting, and a lot of this is what you suggested Mr. Lauro was doing, is it's political defense, and we'll see how it shakes out. But speaking of the First Amendment, your op-ed last week was fantastic. If you believe me, I think yesterday I went on a heck of a rant yelling and screaming about we've given up on natural law and natural rights, and we've given into the legal positivists. And I don't know how many people understood what I was saying, but I think you, of all people, certainly do, and much better than I even understand it. And talking about the First Amendment here in this country, I think it's good to underline for folks, what's the difference between, say, a natural right like the freedom of speech or something like a privilege, like a civil right like voting and whatnot?
So a right comes from our humanity, your right to think as you wish and say what you think and offer what you say. A privilege comes from the government, like voting or a driver's license to drive your vehicle on a government roadway. The government can't create rights. The government sometimes thinks it can, because rights come from our humanity. So the First Amendment says, in part, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Madison, who wrote the First Amendment, was adamant that the word "the" precede freedom of speech, the freedom of speech, so as to demonstrate to posterity the view of the framers that freedom of speech pre-existed the government. Well, if it pre-existed the government, where did it come from? In Madison's view, it's a natural right. It comes from our humanity, which is a gift from God. So if there is no First Amendment, do we still have the freedom of speech? Well, if you believe in positivism, the law is only that which has been written down by the lawgiver and ratified by the lawgiver. There would be no freedom of speech. But if you believe in natural rights, we have the right to speak freely, whether the law recognizes it in writing or not. That's the introduction to my broadside against the government, attempting to accomplish indirectly what the First Amendment unambiguously prohibits it from doing directly, which is infringing upon or abridging the freedom of speech because of its content. Whose freedom of speech did they abridge? People that wanted to criticize the vaccines. They went to Facebook and said, get rid of this stuff on your bulletin board and we'll make nice to you. And Facebook did it. So that's Facebook doing the government's bidding. When Facebook does that, when Facebook discriminates on the basis of content because the government wants it, the courts will impose the First Amendment on Facebook. Now, right now, Facebook could take me down because of the color of my hair or my nationality or whatever I say. If the First Amendment is applied to Facebook, they can't take me down. They are treated as if they were the government. So they're going to lose the privacy aspect of their bulletin board if they keep doing the government's bidding. And the government, there's no end to the government's creativity for violating the Constitution. Absolutely no end to it. This nonsense about trying to do indirectly what the Constitution expressly prohibits it from doing directly should result in people being prosecuted. It never does.
Well, and the most unnerving thing about our times, or at least one of them, is when I look at the Constitution, I look at the Declaration, I read, say, great histories like Conceived in Liberty by Murray Rothbard, or I think back to my natural law classes and 12 years of Catholic school, that this government resembles none of that.
Yes.
And so what type of government do we have? And that seems like nobody wants to answer that with a straight face. They like having it sort of opaque.
Well, we have a government that thinks it can right any wrong and regulate any behavior and tax any event and insinuate itself in any process. The Constitution be damned. We have a government that bribes the rich with bailouts and the middle class with tax cuts and the poor with wealth transfers. We have a government that bribes the states to get them to do things that the federal government is expressly prohibited from doing under the Constitution. And we have a government that uses a carrot and a stick to get private entities to do what it can't do. What's next? Private jails with torture? Because the Eighth Amendment prohibits torture, the government will pay somebody else to do the torturing? They don't care about the Constitution, no matter the oath that they take.
Well, I've
taken a little bit of a rant. I apologize. I didn't mean to speak so quickly.
I love it. And I throw one last thing, and I want to hear what you have on judging freedom coming up. Do you think it's a true statement or a plausible statement if I say the one founder who would probably look at the government we have today and understand it and maybe like it would be Hamilton?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There were some decent parts to him. He did believe in an independent judiciary, but remember, he wanted George Washington to be the king. He would have been George the Fourth. Can you imagine that? Oh my God.
Goodness gracious. Yeah. Like he wanted the unwritten British Constitution. Yeah.
Yeah. He's also responsible for the first National Bank of the United States, which is the great grandfather of the cursed, hateful, brutish, monstrous Federal Reserve.
Well, I got to say real quick, I have my regular psychic is not here, but my other psychic, Sky Mosley, is here. He's a huge fan of yours. And he's sitting over here pumping his fist, nodding his head.
Give him my best.
In the Fed,
tell him I love him.
And what do you have coming up on Judging Freedom?
I have my tent pole. I have the person that draws the highest ratings for me, Colonel Douglas McGregor. As soon as I finish with you, almost at 2:00 Eastern, and of course I'll be posted forever, but live 2:00 Eastern. In retrospect, why did the American government underestimate the Russians and overestimate the Ukrainians? I think he's going to say because the CIA stinks. I'm not sure.
Well, that is must watch. I will be watching this afternoon when I get done here. So always appreciate your time, Judge. Again, folks, Judge Andrew Napolitano.
All the best, my man. Till next week.
Till next week.